It's time now for Scoop, our weekly conversation on international media. With the trust in the press, it's at a nadir. It's a critical eye on a critical profession. And we're continuing to dedicate our shows to the war in the Middle East and how the press is covering it. On April 7th, Donald Trump said if Iran does not agree to his demands, then a whole civilization will die tonight. That statement came hours before his self-imposed deadline. Israel's Channel 13 set up a countdown clock. While Amnesty International said Trump's warning may constitute a threat to commit genocide, CNBC wondered if there was a way to make a buck.
This deadline that President Trump has set, 8 p.m., has threatened to destroy a civilization. How does an investor process that? Is it a bigger upside risk or downside risk?
And before the deadline, the United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire. And taco memes went viral again. Taco as in Trump always chickens out. Japanese news media even spelling it out for their audience. Despite Trump backing off, Lawrence O'Donnell said his threat alone marked a new low for American democracy.
And so the United States of America now must live with the permanent stain on our history that we are the only country in the world who has produced a head of state who said a whole civilization will die tonight. And with that statement, it could not be more tragically clear now that a whole civilization has already died.
On Wednesday, the world found out there was no ceasefire in the war's second front, Lebanon. The Guardian's Beirut correspondent, Will Christou, wrote, quote, "It took Israel only 10 minutes to carry out one of the worst mass killings in Lebanon since the end of the country's civil war in 1990, end quote. This is what it looked like from the ground. Israel bombed more than 100 sites, claiming it was targeting Hezbollah, but among the places that were hit were densely populated areas, civilian areas like a cafe, a mosque, a grocery shop, a pharmacy, and a funeral. More than 300 men, women, and children were killed. The war in Iran and Lebanon has fractured support in the U.S. among Republicans. Here's Tucker Carlson.
These are civilians who were murdered by the Israeli military using American weapons and American tax dollars to do it in order to stop a ceasefire. All of it stopped by Operation Eternal Darkness, targeting civilians. But if you were a civilian on the ground in Beirut, what did it look like? Well, we have this video. This is a little Lebanese girl walking out on a sunny day with her father. Operation Eternal Darkness. That's for sure.
Well, for more, we can speak to Joyce Karam, editor-in-chief of Al Monitor, and Barry Malone, former Reuters correspondent in the Middle East and Africa, author of the Proximities newsletter on Substack. Joyce and Barry, thank you for joining us here. Barry, want to begin with you. Pakistan and Iran insist Lebanon was part of the ceasefire agreement. The U.S. and Israel say otherwise. Now, depending on which media some people followed, they only had the talking points of one government and not the others. Why isn't this clear cut?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I was thinking today that it would be fantastic to have some actual authoritative, deeply sourced reporting on this. And we just haven't seen that come out yet. And I don't know if it's because it's difficult to report. I mean, I know that there are some very strong media outlets in Pakistan and South Asia. We also have outlets in the US with very deep sources in the government. So I am surprised to some extent that this is still a he said, she said kind of story. And I think that perhaps reflects the utter confusion here on what's quite an important point. However, I do think that sadly we're in a sort of a post-truth environment where, you know, the veracity of the claim, whoever's telling the truth, in some extent almost doesn't matter to the extent that it might not influence what comes next.
Yeah, and part of the problem here, Joyce, as Barry was alluding to, well, we don't have a document of the ceasefire. And so much of this was done, Pakistan mediating between two parties, and a lot of this might have been done by back channels or text messaging.
Exactly. Will, this is as much as the war itself. It was very poorly planned. What we're looking online, we're seeing three different versions of the plan. One coming from Islamabad, one coming from Tehran, and the other from Washington. We don't know yet what are the 10 points that the administration reviewed and said it adjusted and it added to its 15 points. So we are very much in a lot of ambiguity on what's Saturday, what will be discussed, who controls the Strait of Hormuz. We up to until today, Iran still is in control of the strait. Attacks from Iran have continued at Gulf states, especially at the UAE and Kuwait, and we've seen Israeli attacks in Iran since the ceasefire. So we really don't know. It's very ambiguous. There was no comprehensive strategy for this war, and clearly there is no comprehensive, articulate ceasefire to end it.
Yeah, Barry, a lot of discussion about some division within the Trump administration on the outset of this war. Now, some administration officials are pushing back against that idea after that New York Times report. I'm just wondering, when you're looking at this, do you see the U.S. and Israel as being on the same page as to how to end this war, or are their paths going to diverge?
It's very difficult again to know, and we're talking about reporting here, and I think that for a long time there were reports coming out of the U.S. where we would hear that Trump is furious with Benjamin Netanyahu, or Trump is out of step with Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government. And actually, that goes back to the Biden administration, too. There was a lot of reporting that Biden was angry with Benjamin Netanyahu, or Biden didn't disagree with the Israeli government. And I do think that a lot of that briefing to the media was, to some extent, an attempt to kind of wash their hands of the worst of the Israeli crimes that we saw committed in Gaza. But I do think that the goals here when it comes to Iran have been so unclear, and it's felt like a long time that the U.S. administration has been sort of making it up as it's gone along and being more, in a sort of a reaction stance than rather than a stance of sort of deliberation as to what it's done. So I think for the first time, we might actually be looking at some accurate reporting about that.
Yeah, and Joyce, just wondering, Donald Trump has threatened to jail journalists in his hunt to find the leaker of that Iran fighter jet story. So we talk about some of the restrictions in the Middle East. Also, it's no good atmosphere for the journalists trying to do their job in the U.S. And one thing the administration often comes down to is that they don't understand that a journalist is meant to ask difficult questions and meant to speak truth to power.
No, for sure. I mean, we're operating, Will, in a very high noise environment. We're more so with this administration. They don't want to be asked the tough questions. We still don't know the accurate casualty count from the Pentagon. We see leaks through Reuters, through other agencies, but there is no transparency on how this war was planned, how it's conducted, and how much the cost is or the casualty numbers. As far as us, as journalists, as editors, we're trying as much to filter through the noise. We do want to verify what we see. There was much propaganda also. Well, I'm sure you've seen it coming from sometimes Iran, coming from the United States, for example, on the status of Mujtaba Khamenei and who he is and all of that. And, just 2 days ago, they're saying he authorized the ceasefire. Well, initially you've said he's in a coma or he's severely injured. So part of it is the fog of war, but more so these days it's the fast speed, the lack of verification that we're seeing in the media. It's allowing all these rumors and propaganda to come out without due diligence on some media outlets.
Yeah, and Barry, some of this, I'm sure I might have been guilty of it. France 24 might have been guilty of it. But sometimes there are these headlines that might be a little bit ambiguous, like Israel targets Hezbollah. But if you read the fine print of what happened, there might have been a cafe that exploded with just men and women inside. And so much of the media might be reporting talking points from a government that's carrying out the strikes. I mean, when you look at the media coverage of what's going on in Lebanon, what do you make of it, Barry?
I think that's absolutely spot on, is that we've had problems. And look, we've had problems for the last 2.5 years since the war on Gaza begun with the framing of these stories, in particular how the Western media, the international media, is framing these stories. So there were several examples when Israel launched its 100 strikes in 10 minutes, as Will Christie from The Guardian, who you quoted earlier, said, rightly called, I think, a massacre. But there were many major media organizations who took at face value Israel's claim that it hit, quote, military installations and military sites. Now, I'm sure a lot of us have been to Dahia in Beirut. I've had coffee there. I've had dinner there. I've walked around there. This is not a military site. This is a neighborhood. This is a place where people live and work and raise children. I don't think it's good enough to frame, to begin with the Israeli claim. You can include it, but what you really need to do is, as a media organization, you lead with what happened. 180 people were killed, 200 people were killed, entire residential buildings were flattened. Then you include the Israeli claim and you scrutinize it. And why do you scrutinize it? Because the Israeli government and the IDF have been proven to lie and lie again for the last 2.5 years. So they're not a reliable source.
Yeah, George, just wondering about your take on this. I mean, you're running a newsroom. There are constant attacks, maybe a little bit more earlier this week, but constant attacks. There's a lot of different countries to report on. How do you set the news agenda, and how do you frame coverage?
No, very much. I mean, we really, again, we operate in a very high noise information sphere. So we try as much not to fall for misinformation, to wait, give it, 15 minutes. We don't prioritize speed in this environment. We prioritize verification of news to make sure, what we're getting is not also, a propaganda talking point from either Washington or the Israelis or Iran. And this happened so much at the beginning of the war. Well, we were getting a lot of reports. Yeah, this is a regime change. There will be defections. The Kurdish groups are gonna go in. They've started going in. We've contacted the Kurdish groups, and they were actually not going in yet. So it's just, we have to be extra careful. We have to just cut through the noise to realize that there are many narratives out there trying to shape this big story. But yeah, having people on the ground in Tehran, in Washington, and in Israel, for example, helped us a great deal at Al Monitor.
We have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much, Joyce Karam from Al Monitor and Barry Malone, the writer of the Proximities newsletter. Pleasure talking to you both. That brings us to our quote of the week, and it comes from the front page of the Lebanese newspaper, Inahar, and it reads, "Ceasefire for others, hell for Lebanon." That's it for this edition of Scoop. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.